Good afternoon, guys. Thanks for being on the Built on Better Decision podcast. Today, we're talking about what's changed in construction cost over the last several years, what's driving those changes, and how they're showing up in real projects, primarily within the context of light industrial development, such as warehouse and logistics facilities that we work on together. We're also going to get into how developers are adjusting, how deals are being evaluated, structured, and moved forward in the very different environment today than we've seen in the recent past. Joining me today are Joe Matthews with ARCO Design Build, Brad Kinzey and Todd Evans with Kinzey Construction, and from our team at Taylor Mathis, Hamilton Reynolds, and Mike Irby. Just a brief background on my guest. Joe Matthews is co-CEO of ARCO Design Build. He spent more than 2 decades with the company, joining ARCO as a project manager and building his career through every role in the organization, from business development, regional manager, vice president, divisional president, before being named co-CEO in January of this year. Brad Kinzey is founder and CEO of Kinzey Construction Company, an Atlanta-based commercial interior and industrial construction firm that he established in 1985. His company's done a lot of work for us, primarily on interior tenant improvements and interior fit up. Joe's company at ARCO's done a lot of our shell construction, along with some site development work on numerous projects. Hamilton Reynolds is partner and president of the industrial division here at Taylor Mathis. Since he's been with us, he's overseen development of over 10 million square feet of industrial projects across the Southeast and helped our company grow into one of the region's leading industrial development firms. Mike Irby is partner and senior vice president of development at Taylor Mathis, where he focuses on development strategy and project execution across our firm's portfolio. He's part of a team that works closely with clients, partners, project teams on industrial and mixed-use development projects. Joe and Brad and Todd, y'all have been longtime partners with us, so really appreciate y'all being here. Mike, let me start with you so we can ground this conversation in reality. We're talking about rising construction costs, and you've got some real examples from our projects that show how much things have actually changed over the past 5 to 7 years. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so it was interesting to go back over the last 10 years and pull some of our cost data from our projects during that period. And, we know that construction costs have risen pretty dramatically over that time period, but it was really interesting to pull the actual costs that we incurred on these projects. And I was looking at projects back in 2015, 2016, when the last cycle started gearing up. And our shell costs for 265,000 square foot buildings were in the $25, $26 range. And then in 2019, we did Friendship Road Distribution Center. We had 4 buildings in that project ranging from 100,000 square feet to 270,000 square feet. Costs for the smaller buildings were $45 a foot up to $32 a foot for the larger 270,000 square foot building. And then when the pandemic hit and development really got going on the speculative side, we had a bunch of examples that, for instance, Sugar Hill Distribution Center, we built 2 buildings up there, 160,000 square feet and a 260,000 square feet. Costs were $38 a foot and $32 a foot, respectively, for those buildings. In 2020, we built Chattahoochee Logistics Center, 1,128,000 square feet. We built that building for just under $25 a foot. And you take those prices and you compare them to our most recent project, Brazelton Distribution Center. For a 290,000 square foot building, we paid $50 a foot, and 225,000 square foot building, $45 a foot. So you're comparing that with, let's say, those Horizon Point buildings 7, 8 years earlier. That's a 70, 80% increase in costs. And as I go through some of these numbers, let's keep in mind that the specs changed over that course of time. We're doing lower clear heights. Slab thicknesses went from 5 to 6 to 7 inches in thickness, and we did soil cement versus gravel into the pad. So, some of the specs have changed, but generally these cost increases are indicating somewhere in the range of 40 to 50% increases. And real quick, I'll sort of wrap it up with a comparison from our Sugar Hill project. That 260,000 square foot building at Sugar Hill, we delivered for $32 a foot. We've got a building that we're currently getting pricing on at Allatoona, our second phase up at Allatoona Business Center, building 300 to 240,000 square foot building. That pricing is coming in at $47 a foot. So that's roughly a 45% increase in cost. And the last example I'll bring up is, again, the Chattahoochee Logistics Center, 1.1 million square feet for $24.30 a square foot. We've recently priced a million square footer up in Commerce at just over $36 a foot. So that's close to a 50% increase in costs. And then just looking at sort of the tenant interiors numbers that Brad and Todd can attest to, just some high level numbers. In 2020, we were paying $165 a square foot roughly for office build out. And we're now generally pricing in at $215 a square foot, which is about a 30% increase. Demising walls, 32-foot clear demising wall is $375 a foot in 2020. We're now a demising wall at the same height for $485 a foot. Again, a 30% increase in cost there. So those are real examples of how pricing has increased, not only from the 16, 17, 18 timeframe, but really generally 2020 through today.
Yeah. So when you look at those numbers and just 40, 50, 60% increases, depending on what you're looking at. I know you started with basic shell costs. Of course, all these buildings are architectural tilt up concrete, varying clear heights. And then you touched on tenant fit up cost and demising cost. So those are, 40 to 60% increases over a relatively short period of time. Those aren't, and I wouldn't call those incremental changes. Those are dramatic changes, but those are the type of cost increases that developers have been dealing with, and that our project team members, the design consultants, the GCs, that's what we're working with today. And obviously, they directly affect how these projects are being evaluated and underwritten, and ultimately whether or not the projects are penciling out. So, Joe and Brad, let's talk a little bit about what's behind this. You're in the middle of pricing and delivering industrial projects every day, so you've got sort of a front row seat as to what's driving these costs. Over the past 5 or 6 years in particular, we've seen a huge amount of industrial space delivered, driven by e-commerce, historically low interest rates and cap rates and strong demand. And that's not just in Atlanta, but across the country. In Atlanta, I don't remember if it was 2022 or 2023, but there was a record 40 million square feet of new industrial projects delivered. So from your perspective, how much did that level of construction activity contribute to these cost increases?
Andrew, I think it contributed in a big way. When you get that much industrial product being delivered at the same time, it just creates a pressure across the entire system. So you had material cost increases, the labor market got tighter, lead times got significantly longer, and the trades just had the ability to become much more selective. And so I think that it wasn't just inflation that you saw, but it was really just the supply chain shock that really has driven the cost up, and it never truly reset it back to where it was, pre-pandemic.
Yeah, I remember in particular, I guess this was maybe pre-COVID, but it seems like one of the big jolts to the system that kind of seemed like it, no pun intended, but snowballed it, was this Arctic vortex that hit out in Texas. That's when we started getting numbers from everybody, all of our contractors, like, what is this? What's up with that? And so I guess that, and then all of the e-commerce boom during COVID kicked it all off. Brad, you want to add to that?
Just what you said about the thing in Texas, I think Todd may remember, but I mean that we couldn't get paint for a while then, but which, in 40 years, I've never had a hard time getting paint, but factories were shut down and you already had this high demand. And so I think the demand had a huge part on it for the material shortages, but also the labor that couldn't keep up. And still today is a tough part of what we deal with.
Were there specific trades that y'all saw where there was more pressure points than other trades?
I'd say on the TI side, speaking on that side only, it was really across the board. We didn't see one group lagging behind another.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing on the shell side, Andrew. Over the past 5 or 6 years, it hasn't been until just recently that we really started to see, sort of skilled trades shortfalls.
So it's interesting. And then 2024, 2025 in the Atlanta market and the other big 5 industrial markets across the country, there was a big pullback. There was less spec industrial space being delivered, but that happened to coincide with this new wave of data center development. Are you seeing that demand affect your construction pricing? And if so, where is that putting pressure on the cost of new industrial projects?
Yeah, I would absolutely say it is putting pressure on it in certain markets. The steel market in particular, the W sections are tougher to get, making them more expensive for a lot of these data centers. But then you're also seeing the data center adjacent, what I call it, the manufacturing for new HVAC units, new electrical components, so on and so forth. But the real pressure in a lot of these areas is becoming the MEP trades that are key to the data center construction. And that's where we're going to continue to see a labor shortage.
Yeah, we had, I think Todd talked to one of our electrical contractors that done in the past had done a lot of work with us. He didn't have the capacity to get more people to do our day in, out tenant stuff.
Todd, I would assume that's a relatively small data center with some of these hyperscalers. QTS and those folks in Atlanta, I mean, they've got 1,000 electricians per building.
Yeah.
At the peak of these things going on. There's not a lot of electrical contractors in Atlanta who can manage that, much less the country.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you talked about data center work. I mean, do you see the bread and butter shell construction side? How does that impacted by the data center demand?
I think a lot of industrial guys are moving over into data centers just because there's so much availability right now. It is putting pressure on our labor as well as our sub-labor in the industrial market.
So what percent of your current business is data center?
Last year, it was 100% industrial. We signed 2 pretty substantial data center projects this year that probably make up 33% of our revenue for the year, just in that 1 to 2 projects.
So that means more resources in the future that y'all are going to dedicate towards data center development versus spec industrial?
I don't know that we'll dedicate more. We're building out a separate team. They're very, very different once you get into the guts of it. So we've moved a few key people over, but then we've made a lot of strategic hires outside the business to support it.
So do you feel like the sub trades are doing the same in terms of bifurcating how they're serving data center construction, or is it all under one roof for those guys as well?
I would imagine that it's all under one roof. I think that the bigger guys, they don't have the resources, quite frankly, to go and do all these projects either. And so what I think is going to happen is you're going to start seeing some of the smaller electricians trying to grow to go pick up some of this smaller data center work as well.
Interesting. When I went back and was looking at, COVID obviously precipitated this huge rise in volume of development, shell development. And then, as Andrew mentioned, the bomb cyclone hit Texas in 2021. And that obviously caused a lot of material shortages and lead times and prices to rise. And then spec development continued to accelerate. And then when it stopped in 23, 24, the data center construction really took off. And so, we haven't ever had a chance to get a breather on pricing because of all these different specialized cycles in development. So it's really contributed to keeping these prices elevated beyond historically what the sort of percent increases that we've seen in the past.
Hey, Mike, just rewinding a minute to something you touched on at the beginning. You talked how looking at these precipitous increases, it's not all apples and apples because there have been some changes in the spec. I think specifically you mentioned in some of our newer projects, like other developers, landlords were bumping their clear heights up. Some depending on the size and loading configuration of the building. It used to be 28, 32 clear. Now it's 32 to 36. And for big box stuff up to 40-foot clear. You also mentioned some of the change in specs on some of our site development, for example, the soil cement, which kind of reminds me on the interior side, one thing we're doing more now, and I assume it's not just us, but a lot of industrial developers and landlords is we're building out what we call spec office, and maybe our specs on the office component of these tenant build outs has changed. Can you touch on that or get Brad to touch on that? What are we doing different that's driving these costs in addition to just the supply and demand and labor things we've been talking about?
I think I'll take it up for you, Brad and Todd, but I think kind of what we saw was during COVID, the leasing velocity was so high that we weren't building a ton of spec early in the cycle, spec office interiors. And then through COVID, the demand was quick for space that these prospective tenants needed office finish in place and ready to occupy. And that sort of created this demand for spec office finish. And, that precipitated sort of the rise and increase in the cost of construction. And in addition to that, when we were building spec office, we really started increasing the level of finish, higher quality finishes, higher ceiling heights to attract wider array of tenants out there. So, all that sort of led to a pretty fast increase in cost. But Todd and Brad, y'all let us know what your perspective on the interior construction cost looks like.
It used to be an upgrade in a interior space in industrial was a 2x2 ceiling. Seriously. And it was VCT floor and rolled carpet. Now, all 9-foot ceilings. And now most of the spaces we build probably have a 12-foot ceiling. Some of them might be 10, some of them are higher. So all the walls are higher. And then the finish levels. I mean, Todd, we're putting ceramic tile in the bathrooms, solid surface tops most of the time in the break room and the bathrooms. Little things like toilet accessories that the specs on those have increased.
And Brad, when we're talking about increasing the ceiling heights, things of that nature, we're also talking about increasing the door heights,
Yes.
volume of air conditioning.
It affects everything. Yeah.
So it really is it affects every different spec and trade.
It touches everything. Yeah, that's right. And then the building height obviously affects our wall, but it also affects our trades, the mechanical guys. They're using different lifts for longer periods of time than they would have been 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
30-foot candles of light in the warehouse at 28 clear versus 36 is a lot different number.
A lot different.
Efficient.
Mike, and I don't know how sometimes it's confusing on our end as far as how you calculate your square foot price for the build out. But what does affect a lot of our numbers is when we're going into a brand new building, where the utilities are placed, how far they're bringing the water line into the building, where the electrical room is in relation to the tenant space. Is it the other end of the building? Are we pulling in all new gas? Just varies from project to project as far as what part of the work is being done under the shell versus what part of that is being done under the TI.
Yeah.
There's a couple buildings that we've recently worked in that we're having to run the water line down to the tenant space, and it's a $100,000 water line on a 3,000 square foot build out.
We struggle with that as well because for us, it's just cost.
Yeah.
L side or it's on the TI side. And how do you make the most sense in paying for that?
We've talked about it before. You hopefully eliminate duplicating, running it on the front end somewhere where it doesn't need to be. But for us, when we look at it, like Todd said, the 3,000 square foot spec space in a building and $100,000 to get the water line, it was a big building from the other end of the building down there. So that skews what we look at. But the level of finish definitely has, you don't have to walk in for very long and see the level of finish.
Yeah, I mean, just since we're talking to a wider audience here, we talked about flooring, for instance. When I first got into business many years ago, we were putting carpet down at $6 a square yard. And now we're putting carpet tiles carpet tiles down at $34 a yard. That just shows you the level of finish that we're putting in. We're putting finishes in that would be considered Class A office finishes in a lot of cases.
Yes.
There's no difference between what we were building. We were building a lot of office finish back 5, 6, 7 years ago. We're putting the same level of finish in industrial warehouses that we have been in Class B, A- office buildings.
Yeah. We build a lot of office space in multi-story office buildings, and in a lot of cases, there's not a lot of difference in some of the finishes.
Yeah. Sounds like we all should be in the carpet business. All the buddies I know from Dalton and Calhoun up in the carpet quarter up I-75 seem to be doing pretty good with me. So this billing out of office is most industrial landlords, all industrial landlords. I mean, it was sort of became prevalent 3 or 4 years ago just because these tenants, there was so much demand and it was speed to occupancy, and the tenant rep brokers said, hey, my guy's got to be in quick. Is this something that we feel like is here to stay, sort of become perfunctory for multi-tenant spec warehouse?
We hope that it is.
Yeah. Was your question, Andrew, the level of finish or the number of?
No, just the fact that nobody was doing this 5 years ago. Seems like now.
Oh, the spec. Yeah, no, it's everybody. I think at one time we might have had 18 different spec spaces going on in different buildings or something. And it's definitely, we're doing it in a lot of places. And where it used to not be. We were doing it in multi-story office buildings well before we started doing it in industrial buildings.
Hamilton, what do you think the market demand, the driver out there is going to keep going for spec office in the future?
I don't see it changing, Mike. I think, especially with the amount of development that's out in the marketplace today, everybody wants to make sure they have a head start on any sort of tenant that's coming along. Otherwise, it's with the permitting process today taking longer and longer. It's going to, without having it built spec, you're going to end up with 4, 5, or 6 months before you can have your space ready, which could kill your deal.
So if you take all of this, we talked about materials and labor, just general supply and demand, volume of construction, we're clearly in a very different environment than we were operating in pre-COVID or even 3 or 4 years ago. So that's where it gets interesting when you're on the developer side of it, because at some point all this is showing up in the deal and how we're underwriting new development. So Hamilton, kind of switching, that's kind of where you're living every day when we're looking at new deals we got higher construction costs we've been talking about. We've also got higher interest rates. We've got higher cap rates. We've got moderation in rent growth compared to what we had during the post-COVID boom. So, there are only so many levers you can pull to make a project pencil out. Just big picture from your standpoint, how are you dealing with that? What adjustments are we trying to make to get these projects where they pencil out and we can move forward?
With all the increasing costs that we've encountered, we'd really be in trouble. But fortunately, there's been a tremendous rent growth over the past 5 or 6 years coming out of COVID. I would guess that rents in Atlanta have gone from $4 to $6 a foot to now $7 to $9 a foot. So that pretty much mirrors what you've seen construction costs do. The only difference is, or one of the big differences is the cap rates. As we were coming out of COVID, they dropped to historical lows in the, low to mid threes, which was really unprecedented and was driven by the, close to zero interest rates. Now that interest rates are up somewhat significantly, cap rates have settled in the low to mid fives. So it makes it that much more difficult to underwrite our deals. So we've got to be super focused on where our costs are, trying to get our contractors to be as aggressive as we can. And also, I guess, secondly, we've got to really drill down on the market, make sure we understand where rents are, because there has been so much rental rate growth. We need to be very comfortable that we're not overshooting rents at this point. So it's a struggle, to be honest.
All right. So it's not one big change. Just general takeaway, listening to this conversation, it's an amalgamation of a lot of things that collectively that have caused the increases in construction cost. Joe and Brad, I mean, as you look out over the next year or two, are there any signals or market trends that y'all are watching closely that could exacerbate, you can increase further, or may cause a moderation in the increases? Anything sort of big picture out there that y'all are especially interested in?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of things we talked about, we can't necessarily, I'm not sure how we can control them. You know, demand for these things sure has kept up prices to some extent. And then you get all these other things where we might have seen a little bit of a reduction from the peak in drywall and framing. Then we've had 100% increase in insulation and other things that kind of make up for that. But one of our, I guess, as we look ahead, is the labor side of it for us has been a big, that's our key, is the balance of the guys we need in the field that build the stuff for us. And obviously we got to have work for them to do. So that's a big challenge for us as we look ahead.
And I would echo everything you said. The labor resources are a big concern to us, specifically with the skilled trades. Material costs are always a question. With oil doing whatever it's going to do, I think that we're going to see more volatility there. And then what we continue to grapple with, just a lot of other people, is just resource allocation for our projects, from our own folks, but then also from our subs and vendors, making sure that we can appropriately staff everything the way that we've committed to.
So, in wrapping it up, Mike, I wanted to just circle back to you a minute. The ARCO guys obviously do shell construction along with some of the horizontal site development, paving, curb and gutter, that type of thing. And Brad's group focuses on interior fit up work. On the front end, that you typically negotiate with site development contractors directly. We don't always put that under the ARCO general contract. On any given project, as we go in, we got a pretty good idea of what shell costs are going to be. We got a pretty good idea of what level of tenant finish we're going to have and what the tenant improvement allowances need to be. So the real wild card from your standpoint is on the front end site development, because that's something that's different on every project in terms of the topo, the geotechnical stuff, rock. That seems like one area where you can actually make a big difference. Can you comment on that, just in terms of the challenges and the opportunities just on making decisions on the front end related to site development?
Yeah, I mean, as we've always discussed, the majority of our risk is always in the site. And you can do a lot of due diligence on the site up front and still be surprised when you open it up and start moving dirt. And so that's, our MO has typically been to spend a lot of time on these sites, figuring them out as much as we possibly can on the front end. And, with regards to sort of pricing our development projects, we generally continually tweak these site plans to find the most efficient layout while also maximizing the FAR on the buildings, so that we can find the sweet spot between the construction costs and maxing out the footage on the building, the leasable area. So, Joe, I don't know how we compare to other developers out there, but we generally run a lot of iterations of site plans and price them a lot, change the specs, look at the buildings, figure out how we make them Class A projects, but minimize some of the more expensive elements like glass and cornices, for instance, or design elements that might drive the cost up. But that's how we deliver value and get these projects to a go, is by just working the site plans and working the specs and working with contractors like ARCO to price these things over and over. And then the final analysis, when we feel like we've got something that's on the threshold of being ready to go, we'll go back to ARCO, for instance, one final time and say, hey, we're looking at a X start date. What kind of sub input are you going to be able to get based on a real start time? And then we can really nail down the shell number in particular and the site. I think we get a lot of value when we're ready to getting close to pull the trigger and the subs know it's a real deal and they're not just pricing the next iteration. So I think that's how we find some value in these projects as well. Joe?
Yeah, I agree. I wish you were like every other developer and only got one price and then we just started right instead of going through it all the time. But no, I mean, you guys really do dig into it a whole lot more than most of our customers. Everybody goes through a lot of rework, especially these days. But the level of detail and the collaboration, I think, is what really helps get the number to where y'all need it to be.
Yeah, Joe, I want to personally thank you for your indulgence of the how many times you're having to reprice stuff. Mike tweaks the damn site plans about every couple of months. I'll say, hey, is this final pro forma? No, we moved this around, we moved this around, and ARCO is repricing it. So thanks
Well,
for your
I'm
patience.
going to pass the buck on Hamilton on that as well.
Well, guys, we really appreciate y'all joining us as guests to talk about this. I hope all of you guys enjoy the rest of the week, and we will see you soon. I'm sure we'll be sending something over to ARCO to reprice here about within a few minutes.
We look forward to it. And we
Oh,
certainly
fun.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's good if we're pricing something, you know?
That's right.
All right. Thanks again, everybody.